If you've seen pictures recently of Kate Forbes MSP out on the campaign trail, sometimes with her young daughter Naomi in her arms, you might think she's some kind of supermum. She's got a challenging, successful political career. She manages to navigate the pressures of life in the public eye with interviews like this. And she's bringing up a toddler with her husband Ali. But behind the headlines, there's a very different story. Because after Kate gave birth to Naomi, she suffered from crippling, terrifying postnatal depression. We don't associate childbirth with thoughts of suicide, we associate it with joy. But it's estimated that at least 1 in 10 women suffer from postnatal depression, and suicide is the #1 cause of death for mums in the first year after giving birth here in the UK. A statistic I find utterly shocking. Just before I bring Kate in, if you're listening to this and you think you need support and help, do get in touch with Mikey's line. I'll be giving out their details later in the episode, and you'll find them in the show notes. Kate, we're catching up just a few days after the general election. How on earth you're still standing after juggling politics and parenthood for the last few weeks, I've no idea, but how are you doing?
I don't have any idea either. You sort of look at your diary every week and think, right, this one's impossible, and you get to the end and you think, wow, we made it possible, and then it starts again on the Monday morning.
How do you actually juggle parenthood with politics? I mean, alluded there, sometimes Naomi's seen out with you, but how challenging is it?
I mean, it does feel impossible. I don't think there is any sort of formula that works. I take Naomi down with me to Edinburgh every week. So we travel down together on a Monday evening and come back up, usually on a Thursday evening, although sometimes it's Saturday. And I just have a jigsaw of incredibly kind people who look after her. And that includes my mum and dad, who are absolutely brilliant. They look after her during the holidays, for example. They're doing solid 5-day working weeks, which with a toddler probably requires a pay rise.
I think it does. Now we're going to come on and talk about how difficult things were just after you first gave birth to her. But how are you enjoying parenthood now?
I love it now, and it's amazing to say that because I genuinely at the beginning didn't understand why people seem to love, giving birth and seem to love having children. And I just couldn't even contemplate why anybody would go on to have another child after they'd had their first. But I just love it. She's almost 2 years old. She's at the stage of regurgitating everything she's heard, which is very dangerous in an election campaign. Thankfully, she was at no point heard saying vote Tory or vote Labour. So that could have been problematic. But she's done quite a lot of photobombing of important photos.
Brilliant. It's an age I remember very well with my own daughter. So I'm delighted things sound to be great now. I'm in awe of the juggling, I have to say. You've clearly come a long way in the past couple of years. Let's skip back to before you had her. Can you remember what your expectations of what early motherhood were going to be like?
Yes, I do remember. And I suppose every woman is different. But I approached it like I would approach a big work thing. Dreadful, isn't it? And I also approached it a bit like a test of endurance, like running a marathon or something like that. And I've always lived my life thinking that in order to get this outcome, you have to put out in this much work. And if you put in this much work, you'll be fine. And so I thought it's a very clinical way of approaching it, but that's what I thought. I thought if I had everything ready to go, I had the cot, I had the car seat, I totally plumbed the depths of Facebook Marketplace, by the way. There was a lot of people whose doors I turned up to purchase second-hand goods who were a little bit taken aback to see me there. But I love Facebook Marketplace. Gumtree is also available. And I was ready. And that's how I approached it. I worked right up into the final point because I just thought you're going from one full-on occupation to the next full-on occupation. And that was my approach. I was very much looking forward to it. But a lot of my sort of colleagues were saying, you need to make sure you rest, that you are prepared sort of mentally. And I just thought, surely there's nothing too difficult that you can't deal with a little bit of hard work. So it was very much grin and bear it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and nothing will be impossible.
And the reality?
It was completely and totally unimaginably different to what I expected. And I think that part of the problem was there was no antenatal classes, it was COVID.
Yeah.
So there was no preparation. I did my own sort of impromptu online class that taught me a little bit about breathing, and that was it. So I had no preparation at all. I really did work up to the day of my due date and then took the rest of the time as a holiday. And when contractions started, I thought, right, here we go. And just to give you a flavour of how I approach things, I remember I used to do some sport, and before a big race, I'd always have a Snickers bar. So I just bought a lot of Snickers bars. And I arrived in Raigmore car park at 6 a.m. having my contractions had started 6 p.m. the night before, and water had broken. And I started downing these Snickers bars, and my husband looked at me asking, what on earth are you doing? And I just thought it made sense to prepare yourself, and then not to be too gross, but got into Raigmore and promptly vomited it all up. So that was my preparation.
I remember worrying about what I was going to wear for labour. And I look back afterwards and thought, at what point did I think I would care in the absolute depth of the pain of labour what I was wearing? And I was sort of astonished at the just the weirdness of thinking things through like that. And I had this whole playlist ready as well. Not one song got played. It's a curious time. I know you had a pretty traumatic and painful time giving birth to Naomi. We don't need to go into the detail of that here. But even at that point, how different was birth in terms of expectation versus reality, do you think?
It's completely different. I suppose the themes that you'll hear throughout this discussion start there. And it's the theme of, first of all, some things being bigger than you. I think you should be able to cope. I thought I should be able to cope with anything, that nothing was too difficult or too big, and you could approach everything by pulling yourself up and getting a grip of it. And labour I couldn't control labour. It's uncontrollable. It's extraordinarily painful, as everybody knows, and the unexpected happens. And you're entirely in the care of so-called experts who are wonderful and caring, but you are entirely at their mercy. And I think that is a theme that then continued in the post-labour experience mentally, where I was out of control. And you cannot get a grip of it, and you can't use any of your coping tactics because you are out of control. You need something else, some more help. And so that was the experience of labour, of the unexpected, and of any planning I had. And I did have planning. I thought if you just kept breathing and you just kept moving and you just kept positive and in control, it would be fine. I didn't count on a baby's heart rate almost disappearing, and I didn't count on sort of starting to lose blood, and I didn't count on the room filling with professionals, and I didn't count on having interventions, because I thought I could do it all. And you can start to see where that post-labour experience comes in, of feeling like I was out of control and I didn't know what to do about it.
So how soon after you'd had Naomi did your mental health really start to deteriorate? What was the path?
So the first night you are on a high. I think everybody accepts that. You're on a high. I was completely numb from the waist down because they had been planning to do a C-section. So I couldn't move. I had this small thing. And that high quickly disappeared because they had to whisk her away to the special baby unit. And that was the first moment I felt like this, I don't like this, and worry and anxiety and fear about what was going to happen to her. But it's kind of compensated by the high, and she came back and it was fine. And they kept us in hospital for a few more days. But I just did not sleep. I couldn't sleep. I had total insomnia and I could not sleep. And very quickly that started in the hospital. And I thought I just needed to get out of hospital for things to get better. And I got home, and that's when sort of the night terrors and the day terrors started. And I was overwhelmed by fear for the baby's health. I assumed I would be the person that would cause her pain and suffering, and therefore that it would have been better for me to be elsewhere. And I didn't bath her. I could barely lift her, that kind of thing. I was really concerned about her safety. And then I was convinced that somebody was going to cause us harm. So it started fairly quickly, but I was still keeping it under control, pretending that everything was fine. And as a politician, I suppose I'm a professional at putting a smile on and giving the right answer, irrespective of how you feel inside. So I did that for a while, and I just continued to not sleep at all. And things like I'd go to have a shower, but I'd have to have a 30-second shower because I was convinced somebody was just about to enter the bathroom with a machete or a knife or something to cause. So it's craziness, and I mean that in a non-disrespectful way. I mean, it's absurd, but there is no facts that can almost counteract what you believe so strongly. So that's when it started, and then it was within a week that the health visitor or the midwife who'd been visiting on a daily basis, it was and then I couldn't even speak without being in tears, and it all sort of came out.
And it sounds like it felt, really real, that fear.
Absolutely. It was a fact. It was an absolute fact. I would have promised somebody was hovering, just outside the bathroom at these moments of vulnerability, when you're having a shower or something. I was absolutely convinced. In the middle of the night, waking up just and terrified that somebody was standing over me or the baby, causing harm.
Were you able to share that with Ali?
Yes, eventually. He knew about the insomnia, but I had suspected that, because again I assumed that you can solve all these problems with just the right actions. I'd assumed it must be the medication, because I was on quite a lot of medication for pain relief, and I had just assumed that the pain relief must have a side effect. So when I asked the midwife what the side effects were, and she said, "Oh, there's none," I was like, well, I need to find an explanation for this, which is something that can switch on or switch off to solve it. And I couldn't find that thing. So I had shared these symptoms, but in a sort of quite a dismissive way of something, we must find the root of this. And it clearly is not in my mind, the root. It's something external.
So at what point did it get raised that you were suffering postnatal depression?
Well, Ali had mentioned it and I had dismissed it as nonsense because it clearly wasn't depression. And I had never suffered from any mental health issues, as far as I was aware, in my life. And I felt it was completely unfair giving me a label for something that I knew of had really caused new mothers incredible difficulty and suffering. And I didn't believe that should apply to me. And then he started reading out some of the symptoms, and it was just tick, tick, tick. And even then, I dismissed it as it's clearly not postnatal depression. And then the midwife went through, there's I forget the name of the survey that they use, and I scored extremely low on that survey. And reading through the survey, I felt like this was bizarre, because it was almost every question was a question that hit the nail on the head for me. So an inability to sleep, fear of harm coming to you or your baby, a sense of overwhelming sorrow and sadness, which was true. It was like a suffocating sense of sadness, a sense that everything would be fine if you just weren't there. I had this dream that if I could just go back to the hospital and fall asleep for months and months and months and come back maybe in a year's time, everything would be fine. Or if someone could just sort of take me out of the picture and deal with everything and then bring me back. So every question seemed to, and so she said, well, that looks to me like postnatal depression. But again, it didn't feel like depression, or I suppose it didn't feel like the stereotypical sense you might have of depression.
Comes back to what we've been, that theme that we've been talking about, expectation versus reality.
Mm-hmm.
Your expectations of what postnatal depression must be, and this was anything but. And that makes me wonder whether, because I remember, I struggled quite a bit after giving birth to my daughter, and someone just said, oh, you're having a touch of the baby blues, which sounded massively downplaying what I was feeling at that point. And I wonder if, for some reason, we haven't got a great understanding of what postnatal depression looks like from outside. I mean, how could we have got to the point of having a baby and not be aware? I find that astonishing. Are you surprised, looking back, at one, how intense the feelings were and the experiences that you were going through, and two, that was postnatal depression?
I am still, use the word astonishing, I am still astonished by the lack of understanding of an issue that affects so many women. I mean, I'm generally astonished by how little resource and research there is into pregnancy and women's health issues in and around pregnancy, considering the impact it has on thousands upon thousands of women, and nobody in this world exists that hasn't, as it were, put a woman through some form of pregnancy. So that I find remarkable, just the lack of understanding. And it wasn't that many years ago that it would just be dismissed as the baby blues. And for some women, it comes and goes. It's a day of emotional challenge. And then for some women, it descends very rapidly into something extremely serious. And I have to commend NHS Highland, I have to commend the midwives and the doctors. They really couldn't have done more. And I think that is rare based on what other women have shared with me. But I am so impressed with how quickly they acted and how quickly they put in place support that I probably would have dismissed if they hadn't forced it on me.
I want us to come back to how you managed to I want to say get well again, to get to a point where you could be enjoying Naomi. So we will come back to that. But at the moment, I'm interested in this experience of postnatal depression, and what impact did it have on your relationship with your baby and maybe with Ali?
So it was, interestingly, the relationship with Ali was critical. So he forced me, and I know that that's not a great word, but in this occasion it really was an important word. He forced me to talk about it. He forced me to take it seriously. He didn't let me dismiss it as irrelevant or just a passing feeling. And that was essential. And we methodically went through all of the feelings I had, and he gave me the alternative facts, which I dismissed and didn't believe. But it was just a step-by-step talking about the feeling. And that was required, because I would have otherwise felt anybody that dismissed it would have just fed into my feelings that it wasn't that important and got it worse. And with Naomi, it was just, I just felt like I just was really concerned about her. I took loads of photos in those early weeks, because I knew at the time that I needed to be able to look back and remember what she was like, because I felt I wasn't in the moment. I wasn't enjoying it. I didn't spend enough time with her. I didn't pick her up. It was just, everything was so overwhelmingly hard. I thought at the very least you need to take photos of this. And it's sort of like it was a way of not berating myself for missing the opportunity. Just take the photos, enjoy them later, because at the moment you're not enjoying it.
Have you any sense of where your expectations of motherhood were formed, of why you had this vision of what it was going to be like, and the reality was so far from it?
I think it's probably, well, the public portrayal, every portrayal of motherhood is full of sweetness and light and baby blankets and snuffly little noises and being cocooned. And even speaking to friends, they recalled the nice bits and shared the nice bits and not the difficult bits. And even I fell into that trap of speaking to friends who were newly pregnant or about to give birth. And I didn't want to share with them all the difficulties, so I didn't. And you want them not to fear what's coming. But then speaking to mothers in baby groups after the baby was born, realising that every single one of them had a traumatic story. Some of them had, health impacts that had lasted years as a result of their birth. And that's the astonishing part, isn't it? It's like 100% of mums go through a traumatic experience, and a lot of them suffer the consequences mentally or physically for years to come, and we don't talk about it.
We don't, and I'm having exactly the same experience of going to a mother and baby group and finally meeting someone who said, "Oh, it's awful, isn't it?" And I went, "Oh, thank God." Yeah. And we kind of clung to each other, like kind of we were shipwrecked, saying no one told us. Yeah. And I understand why we don't talk about it. In part, we obviously don't want to share these things because we don't want to rain on someone else's parade and their experiences of becoming a parent. But to what extent do you think, in part, we also feel there is a stigma still attached to this particular part of mental health?
Well, I still feel, even talking to you about it now, I feel like I failed in some way. I used to say, I said it often, I need to have another baby just to prove I can actually do it. And I need to prove that I can do it without failing. And that's dreadful, isn't it? And that's just instinctively where my head was until very recently. And perhaps there's still a strain there, as if it's a performance and you have to meet a certain criteria, and that was a big fat F. But next time we'll go for a B, and that's awful. And the reason I spoke about it was because at the time I was conscious of the support network I had, and I couldn't understand how any woman could cope with going through this experience without the support. What of those women that are in domestic abuse situations, or who are contending with other children, or who don't have the other thing? And I also said at the time, actually, those who are in war zones. Now that's far removed from our experience, but I wanted to speak about it because of the number of women that go through it and the number who don't get help. And we know where that leaves them. And because I know that there is help, I had this huge weight and burden of thinking that maybe I could talk about it to prove to people that it's not a big fat F, it's not a big fat fail, and you need help, and you're not failing, you actually need help.
That word performance really leaps out at me. And there is something there about feeling you are on a stage and that you're being a parent is really under scrutiny from every direction. I remember it so clearly, and my daughter's now 15, but I remember it like it was yesterday, of thinking I didn't match up to everyone else's expectations, let alone my own. And I wonder where that comes from. Is it a societal thing, or is it just that we're imagining everyone looking at us? I'm not sure. Did you feel that you were being observed?
I felt that there were two groups of observers, and they were incredibly kindly observers. So there's the healthcare side of things, because they're very involved, and one midwife would suggest that you should be waking the baby however many hours, and the next would suggest that you let the baby sleep. And I had a lot of difficulty with breastfeeding, which I persevered with, again because I thought it was a performance, and I needed to meet that standard of persevering irrespective of the pain and the other things which I won't go into on the cracks and all that. So
I do, unfortunately.
And you're trying to perform to keep this little person alive, and you're getting such conflicting advice, and you just don't know what it means to meet the standards of persevering with the breastfeeding, persevering with the sleep, persevering with and now you've got a world of gadgets too. Do you have the gadget that regulates your baby's breathing? Do you have, and it's just overwhelming. And then you also have the friends and family, who, lots of wonderful people, but X worked for them and Y worked for them, and they would recommend this and they would recommend that, and you are utterly clueless. You have no manual, you've never done it before. I said it's like trying to pass your driving test, having never been in a car, having been sleep deprived for weeks and being pumped full of chemicals, getting in a car, which, is essentially a dangerous thing, isn't it? And having to pass your test.
And all of that with the context and background of having been, and still are, a successful, achieving, educated woman. That's part of this party, isn't it?
It is very much part of that party. It's about external performance. It's about passing exams. It's about getting through elections. It's about appearing to be in control, calm, cool, collected, with the right answer at every occasion. And there is something there with the fact that everybody I was engaging with, even in the hospital, the wonderful, wonderful midwives, they're all my constituents. So you have that element of thinking, wow, they must think so much less of me because I'm not able to do this, that, and everything. I make it sound really dreadful, and I don't mean to do that. I really mean to try and analyse. And for me, that was my stage. But for somebody else, there'll be an identical stage, but there's just different characters and different actors on that stage.
If you are listening to this and you're on a particular stage and it is striking a chord with you, don't forget, if you need someone to talk to, you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55, or you can contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter, and the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. They're available Sunday to Thursday, 6pm to 10pm, Friday to Saturday, 7pm to 7am, and all those details are in the show notes. Let's turn to how you got through this and what your pathway to getting getting support and feeling good again was?
So firstly, it was accepting that there was something that was wrong. It wasn't just me that was wrong. There was something that was irrational. And that was being willing to speak to, in my case, my husband, but for others there'll be an alternative, somebody else. But you have to speak to them. And then secondly, it was deciding to speak to the midwife and just downloading everything. And having said that, if they had then not acted on it or had dismissed it, then we wouldn't have got any further. Because in the next few weeks and months, there were some doctors I spoke to who did make me feel like this was just a passing phase, I'd get over it, and I probably shouldn't be troubling a doctor with it. And there were others who couldn't have been better. They booked me in for weekly appointments. We had weekly catch-ups on how things were going. They made offers and talked me through the alternatives in terms of medication or talking therapies and other things. For me, the reason I didn't go down the medication route was because obviously when you're breastfeeding there's still help available, don't get me wrong, but there's fewer options, and the one that I was recommended, there was a risk that it might take a little while to kick in, and it might make things more difficult for a period before they got better. And so I thought, right, I'm going to try the talking route and the therapy route. So that's the route that I went down. But again, feeling really stupid making the appointment and thinking, counselling and therapy are for people that have real problems and not for me. So there's always that risk running through it, but just persevering and just keeping on going, even if you felt quite stupid.
How long did it take before you remember thinking, I'm starting to feel a bit better here?
Yeah, there was a few moments where I thought, wow, the sun is shining and it doesn't make me feel miserable. The flowers are beautiful and I don't feel like they're mocking my misery. It was August and then September. And actually, when winter came, the baby was born in the beginning of August. When winter came, I thought, wow, I'm finding I've got more happiness in the rain than I ever had when the sun was shining in August. And I think that there was a small tail to it as well. Even during Christmas, there was still an echo of it, but the real depth of it had passed by then.
Now, you have chosen to be very open about it, and you're obviously being very open about it for speaking of suicide. Have you had any negative response to you being so open about it?
No, I think that there is a risk that I am very conscious of, which is recognising that all of this is relative, and it's relative to me, and my experience will be very different from somebody else's experience. And I do not want to give the impression that all experiences are equal. We all experience it differently. And so that I think would be the only feedback I've had, which is, everybody's experience is different, but I've not had any negative feedback, if anything the contrary, which is people saying that echoes my experience so clearly.
As a politician, you're in a very, in a sense, privileged position in that you can focus efforts to some extent. You can think a lot about where change would be beneficial. I wondered how these experiences had changed your path as a politician, if at all.
They have. They've made me a very different politician. I certainly think it's given me a lot more compassion, a lot more empathy, and a lot more concern for women's health in and around babies. And I've got involved with a number of organisations or initiatives trying to make more progress or raise awareness of these issues. And also, I've engaged previously with the Health Secretary to ask for another look at how the services are delivered. Because I do think my experience of NHS Highland was positive. It was really good. But there's some things to learn there about having point people, contact people, training midwives so they feel better able to support women.
And does that hope of yours, does your focus go beyond women and postnatal mental health? Because I have to say, I talk to people all the time for this series from all kind of quarters who have gone through terrible things in terms of mental health, and people are always saying to me they don't feel there is enough resources put into support. I have that on a loop doing this. And the point of this podcast with you, this episode with you, was not to get political, but I'm interested whether you feel, to what extent we need to be rethinking how we're dealing with mental health, not just for women, but across the board, Kate.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a cultural change required, and that will take longer, and everybody's got a stake in that. And that's a cultural change about being open, willing to talk about things. And then there is a service reform that's required, which is being able to access support when you need it. And now, we've been on a journey in terms of the funding that's being invested, the recruitment that's required. But I also think there's something there about making every issue also a little bit about mental health. So a midwife is trained in delivering a baby, not necessarily trained in then supporting the mental health of the mother, but she's probably best placed to also support the mental health of the mother in the immediate aftermath of giving birth and looking for signs. So I think it's also about the top-up training, and midwives in particular, but I suppose this is a principle that's applicable. If you've been through a cancer diagnosis, who supports you with the mental health impact of that? If you've been through a bereavement, who is the first point of contact to support you on the mental health side? And so there's something there about top-up training, I think, for the frontline workers who will support you on the substance of the issue and then help you deal with the aftermath of the issue.
Kate, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for speaking of suicide. Good luck with juggling all the politics and parenthood. I'm delighted that you've got to the point of enjoying life with Naomi so much, and I hope it continues that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was talking to Kate Forbes, and Shona McPherson has been listening to my conversation with Kate. Your thoughts?
Yeah, wonderful to hear from somebody in the public eye having courage to share so openly, so honestly about a topic that definitely needs to be normalised and spoken about without fear of judgment, without the stigma that seems to still be around. And as was said at the start, postnatal mental health difficulties are incredibly common. Maybe 1 in 10 mothers experiencing this, and sometimes fathers too. And postnatal depression and the baby blues, sometimes the terms are used interchangeably. And my understanding is that the baby blues is that term that lasts for about 2 weeks, and it's when the hormones are changing just after giving birth and you're not sleeping and there's that massive shift. But if it's going on for longer than 2 weeks, there's something else going on here. Postnatal depression has it's much more persistent, much more severe, as Kate was describing it. Her experience of that lack of control, both of the birth process, but then of her mind after getting out of hospital, sounds absolutely terrifying. And that persistent feeling of being a failure, of being judged, of not doing it right, of judging herself. And I think in that interview you both captured just that societal pressure that there can be to be seen as being this perfect mother. when how can we be? It's this incredibly difficult, life-changing experience, and we're exhausted and our body's been through so much. So postnatal mental health difficulties can include the symptoms that Kate shared: depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive thoughts, such as intrusive thoughts of harming our body. These are symptoms that we can have. But also other problems can be birth trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, having given birth, or on rare occasions, psychosis. None of these conditions are our fault, nor do they show that we're a bad mother or a weak person. Why we get them isn't entirely clear. There can be some risk factors, such as having mental health difficulties before, but there's no single reason. But what is wonderful in that interview, with the love and the care, Kate was able to get the help, and to when she was able to ask for it, things changed for her. So if you're listening to this and identify with any of these symptoms, or whether or not you've had a baby, if you're struggling, please know that you can't make things worse by asking for help. It can only help. So please don't be alone with these difficult experiences.
Thanks, Shona. So don't forget, if you do need someone to talk to or some help, you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55, or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. And all those details and links are in the show notes. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line. This series in particular is being supported by McDonald's in the community, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode or a series, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.